it's Jane here, and as you can see, we are not at the plot today because, to be honest, what's the weather like, Mike?
Rotten.
Rotten.
Windy and cold.
And to be honest, at this time of year, thank goodness, there isn't an awful lot to do up there, so we thought we would stay in, hunker down by the fire, and just have a little chat. Or moreover, instead of me doing all the talking, I'm going to be asking Mike some questions really about your gardening past, Mike. Is there one? Was there one? Any sort of question you might think. I've got written on my little bit of notebook here. And I must admit, I did say to Mike, do you want me to ask you a few questions beforehand so you can be prepared? And he said no. So he's just prepared for me to fire questions at him. So,
element of surprise.
Yeah, I just thought it'd be something a little bit different on this February Sunday afternoon. So, yeah, this is Mike. Now, many of you will have seen Mike in the background, occasionally coming forward, coming on in the live chats, but I don't know if we know that much about your background, Mike. Re-gardening.
Oh.
So, what?
This may not be the forum to discuss my full background.
Re-gardening. We'll keep it in that little niche. So, what are your first memories of gardening?
I think my first memories of gardening go back to a time that I spent with my grandma and granddad when I was very young, and they had a little kind of tiny council house garden with a path down the middle, and my uncles would grow potatoes and carrots and cauliflowers and greens and things like that. And there was always a little rhubarb patch in the very sort of far left-hand corner. So my first memories of gardening really, my uncle Philip in particular, who passed away a few years back, and he was the person who looked after that garden, very tiny though it was.
Did you see it as a real treat, or was it just something that was there? It was just their back garden. It
was a treat. It seemed big then. Everything when you're little, it sounds daft, but everything does seem big. And back then, I think one treat that I remember was going to the back of the garden and pulling up rhubarb and then dipping the rhubarb in sugar, which led to a lot of fillings.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s when dentistry wasn't so good.
Yeah, you dip it straight in the rhubarb.
Oh, yeah.
Eat it, all your enamel
The sugar made it bearable.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, you were getting all your teeth taken out.
But that was just your way of life, wasn't it? Like you say, it wasn't like you were in the middle of the country and, it was bang in the middle of the city centre, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, and I think it was at a time when, maybe sort of adults weren't so keen to sort of involve children and give them their own little patch and get them growing sunflowers and things like that. Mm. It was just that the rhubarb patch was there, and I found it with my cup of sugar.
And was that? Do you think that because your granddad had lived in the same house, was that part of his generation that it was growing food more or less for necessity?
Well, they moved into that house in the 50s, and it was a sort of a new build then in Newcastle.
Yeah.
On a big, medium-sized council estate, and I think it was probably the practice then that loads of people kept a few, chickens in the back garden, things like that.
To eat.
To eat, yeah. My uncle Philip at one point had a whole sort of what's the word now? He had an army of mice because he decided to keep mice under biscuit tins in the back garden, and then as the mice population grew and he fed them, there were several upside down biscuit tins with bricks on top, which led to quite a prolific mouse infestation. He wasn't very popular with the neighbours.
Why did he keep them? Did he like them?
I think he just liked keeping pets.
Oh, bless him.
He liked keeping rabbits, and he liked keeping mice, and he liked keeping anything that he could keep, really.
So
pigeons.
He was keeping them as pets, not as something to do with the garden?
No, and there weren't anything to eat.
I was going to say, you wouldn't get much off them, would you?
No.
But, so did you actually do any gardening? Can you remember doing any gardening? I mean, you said about picking the rhubarb.
I think I do remember being asked to dig up some potatoes at some point.
Yeah.
At a time when the ground was really nice and soft. And I think, even now, as an adult now, well into, adulthood, of course, I still have dreams about sort of what it feels like to pull a potato out of the ground.
And anyone who's ever harvested potatoes will know that feeling. And in fact, we were talking about the fact that we don't think we're going to do main crop potatoes this year. But I'll miss that. That is one of those very, very innate enjoyments, isn't it, of gardening?
Yeah,
of the harvesting, going under that ground, not knowing what you're going to find. So, yeah, quite a strong memory, I would say.
I have similar dreams sometimes about finding money, but that never really
down
materialises.
the back of the sofa. Yeah. So, you weren't necessarily a gardener. You were brought up with people gardening around you. And I suppose, really, would it be the 80s, the 90s that gardening became sort of quite popular? You had your Gardener's World. I know we had like Percy Thrower. I was brought up with Jeff Hamilton. He was the gardener. But it wasn't seen as such a huge leisure activity as it is now.
I think there were so few TV shows on TV at that time that even if you weren't desperately interested in gardening, you would have seen Percy Thrower at some point.
Yeah, because there wasn't a lot to choose from.
3 channels or 4 channels, when we were kids.
Yeah, and heaven forbid have a female gardener on there.
Exactly. I mean, the other exposure that I had to allotment sort of type gardening was that my uncle Eddie, who was my mum's
other brother,
various brothers, but he was her younger brother, one of her younger brothers. He had a pigeon ducket, and he had a very sort of small allotment site next to that. And he would bring back leeks. Leeks were a big thing for him, very northern thing, as you might imagine. Yeah. And I think the leeks did very well on the back of the pigeon fertiliser, you know.
And even now, I remember when I first met you, we used to go around to your mum's house, and she'd make, was it leek dumpling?
Yeah.
A leek dumpling. Actually, I've got very fond memories of those leek dumplings.
A bit like a friend of the haggis.
I suppose it is a vegetarian haggis.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have been vegetarian because it probably had lots of suet in.
In a pudding cloth.
Yeah.
Wrapped in a pudding cloth.
Yeah.
And then just sort of balanced in the water, just hovering over the top of the boiling water.
Yeah. And that'd be a recipe that was, do you remember having that as a child? Would that be something your grandma would have cooked?
Not regularly, but it was something that we had every now and again,
Yeah.
It's not something that you see in fancy restaurants very often.
No. Well, I think there should be a bit of a revisiting of the leek pudding. Maybe we're missing out on something. So,
another video idea there. Yeah.
Jim, if you're watching, leek pudding. See what the wartime roots are. Okay, so we met early adulthood, didn't we? Sort of like, getting on for 20, round about that sort of period.
In 1985?
Yeah, so last century, as I always say.
Yeah.
And I'd always had an interest in gardening, but my parents' garden was always, it was floral. There weren't any veg. They did have a greenhouse at one point, but it's not about me. But
your parents were from a more sort of aspirational kind of background in lots of ways. They bought their own house, and they had greenhouses, didn't they? And they had gardens with borders.
They had one greenhouse, but it was very much about making the garden look nice.
Yeah.
So it was very much like the plants were very much did as they were told in certain rows and everything. But but I did have a garden, and I enjoyed being in the garden. But I always knew from that when I got older, as soon as I got some outdoor space, I wanted to garden in it, which is what I did.
That's what you did.
So, but what I'm getting to is, do you think if we hadn't met, you would have had the same sort of interest in gardening? Because you had the necessity side, I had the more decorative side, if you like.
I think you got me into gardening, or what you got me into sort of into the groundwork and the preparation for gardening in a way, because we had such. When we were students, we had such tiny, and then afterwards, actually, for a long time as well, we had rented properties with really tiny little yards.
Concrete yards.
And I remember you getting me to sort of to dig up part of a concreted yard at one point, and clearing bricks and then bringing some soil in and things like that.
Building a raised bed
to help you to make
out of stone.
Basically a herb garden with some flowers.
Yeah.
In our first shared, or one of our first shared flats.
Yeah.
And then we did the same thing when we moved to the next couple of flats after that.
So wherever we went, we got a little bit more land, and so.
And the die was cast very early on that I would be the one breaking up the concrete and then burying in the soil, compost these days.
Are you saying it's brain and brawn, Mike?
I'm saying that
brain and brawn.
I'm saying that you're the planner, and often I'm the doer.
And I'm the don'ter.
I'm the doer of the groundwork often.
But it's interesting though, isn't it? People talk about the sliding doors moment. If we hadn't met when we did and gone on to have the sort of life that we've had and the time to be able to, certainly I've had time to be able to garden, even when the kids were little, you had a little bit of time to get out there. What do you think you would be doing if you didn't garden, if we didn't have an allotment? Let's face it, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of work. When people ask why you do it, the only reason really is, the vegetables and the fruit, they're a bonus, but you wouldn't do it if you didn't enjoy it. So I think, given that time and energy commitment, if that wasn't toward the garden, what would you be using your time doing now? I mean, you are still at work. I mean, you're looking at retiring in a year or two. But what would you be spending that energy on?
Well, I enjoy cycling, but I haven't done a lot of cycling in recent times. So
No.
I probably would be spending time doing that more, and I probably would spend more time maybe drawing and painting, because I was keen on drawing and painting and always have been. But I think my sort of definitely my big hobby and interest outside of work is definitely gardening.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. Can you imagine it not being there?
No, because I think we've been doing it now, and we've had allotments on and off since we were in our mid-20s.
So it's part of life as we know it, isn't it, really?
It is just part of the fabric of our lives now, I think. And I think, we both love sort of looking at seeds and kind of seed catalogues and getting ready for, the planning, although I'm a terrible planner, as you know.
But you're a good experimenter. I'm
a good experimenter. I do like to spot new things that are worth trying, I think.
Yeah.
I'm always excited by those successes. Like, for example, a couple of years ago when we grew our first ever blue Hubbard squash, and we started sort of, dealing with Marina de Chogia and sort of unusual things like that. I'm always interested to find new things. Ned's atomic grape last year. Sorry,
Ned.
Brad's atomic grape. Sorry,
I think that's a bit of a spin-off. That's probably the cheap one you can get.
We had a rabbit called Ned.
We did.
But Brad's atomic grape, that was great, wasn't it, to find out?
That was great. Yeah.
So I think there's always something in every gardening year that's like exciting and a bit different.
To measure the disappointment.
To measure against the disappointment, because inevitably your peas will not be what you want them to be.
No.
And the snails will eat your brassicas and so on.
But you touched on your background there with painting and drawing. I mean, that was what you were doing when I met you. You were doing a fine art degree.
Yeah.
And so I think then, very much your 20-year-old self, what would you have thought, if you can go back to how you were thinking in your 20s, what would you have thought you would have been doing at this age, which we'll just call it 50 plus, Mike? We'll call it 50 plus.
I think I would have imagined that I would be a very famous painter or cartoonist living in London and having a whale of a time.
Yeah.
I think I didn't see myself at that time as somebody who would go into education, for example.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that I would be living in Staffordshire, at this point,
Yeah. So it could be, again, sliding doors moment, it could be that, had life taken a different turn, you'd have been in a studio apartment. You're saying London, you could have been anywhere in the world, producing paintings for the art market, and maybe being really unhappy with it. Rich, but happy.
I think the thing is that fine art is such a very...
Your own organic veg, that's all I'm saying.
Fine art's a really difficult area to make a living in, and I think to maintain a career in. And we've got friends who've done that from those university days.
Really stuck with it.
Done really, really well. And I think you've got to take your hat off them, because it's a really hard path to choose, I think.
Yeah.
But I think for me, the thing that I was actually more successful in was working as a cartoonist. And at that point, I think maybe sort of in our late 20s, early 30s, I was selling cartoons.
Yeah.
And not having masses and masses of success, but I was having success where I was selling to national magazines like Punch magazine, and I had cartoons in the Independent, which was a big ambition of mine. Once or twice, but that wasn't a frequent employer. It was a satirical newspaper called The Cartoonist that I sold a lot of cartoons to.
Yeah.
So there was a moment there when that could have been something that I
in that direction.
Yeah. But I don't regret at all going into teaching and then going into the management of a department. I've loved my time in education. It's been amazing.
But it's been, and again, just
and
to
I've met
clarify,
amazing people.
Yeah, you're teaching fine art and graphics, so it is still within that area. That
drawing, illustration, graphic design. Yeah,
so you're passing on. What you learned.
And I've been very lucky to work with really, really talented, committed people over many years, and I've had a lot of fun as well. An awful lot of fun.
So it's like when I was talking before about the allotment and the garden taking up a lot of energy and commitment. Actually, for those people who you mentioned who have continued and still are 30 odd years later, producing work, having exhibitions and things like that, that is a huge part of their life. And I know I've said to you before, it's on a day like today, and I've said to Mike, do why don't you just go take yourself off and go and do some drawing or something? But you said very much, you need to be in the right sort of zone. You need to be able to sort of almost build up the enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And the background in which you want to do that. And I think that's something that retirement is going to offer you.
Yeah.
That you might be able to
yeah. I mean, an even more special breed of person, in my opinion, than an artist is somebody who works full-time in education at any level.
Okay. Yeah.
And then still manages to be an artist. I think
still wants to do it.
My colleague Cheryl, as you know, does that, and I think there's very, very few people who've got that kind of energy.
Yeah. Because
teaching and working in education, it's full on, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
Doesn't let you go at the weekend sometimes.
Oh no, not at all. Okay, come on then, Mike. Favourite thing about it? You've more or less summed it up, but I want it in a nutshell. What's your favourite thing about gardening and being able to go? What makes you wake up in the morning on your days off? Let's face it, you do work full on. You can do 12-hour days, 5 days a week sometimes.
Not that
much. At times. What makes you think, right, I'm going to spend my spare time going up to the allotment? Why do you do it?
I think I work in a job where you talk to people a lot, and there's a lot of communication with students and parents and staff and peers, and I think being at the allotment for me is it's an escape from that. It's a very quiet place. It's a very sort of contemplative place. Instead of sitting looking at a screen for hours on end or days on end, answering emails, etc., you've got your hands in the soil and you're kind of reconnecting with something very natural. And I love that. I just love, I think it's probably in all of our genes to sort of to have that kind of, or to want that connection with nature. And it's definitely about that, and feeling like you're going to produce something that you don't necessarily have to produce, but it is going to be by you on your terms to feed your family, based on plants that you've chosen. There's something very, very innate about that.
Favourite tool?
Favourite tool? I should have thought about this. I think my favourite tool is the stirrup hoe. I still think it's a stirrup hoe.
Can you describe the stirrup hoe?
So a stirrup hoe is a. I'm sure that Jane can include an image of what one of these things look like. I hadn't heard of one until you mentioned one. I think about maybe 5 years ago, something like that, and you bought me one. And it looks like a sort of a
stirrup, Mike.
Well, yeah, it does a little bit. It's a sprung. It's a hoe with a sprung sort of D-shaped sharp attachment on the end. If you saw one and you didn't know what it was for, you'd be, I think, a bit confused.
Yeah.
But it basically enables you to sort of reach out with the hoe and then kind of pull back, pull the ground back towards you. And it's very good at just cutting the tops of the weeds off really quickly. And when the ground is more kind of friable and more workable, you can kind of like push it and pull it at the same time.
Yeah. So you get two lots of hoeing for one action.
Yeah. And if you're interested in not digging and not disturbing the soil too much, it just keeps it tidy, and I think it's a favourite tool of mine.
Okay. Favourite crop?
Favourite crop would be Cavolo Nero. I love Cavolo Nero.
That's it. That's your favourite crop.
Yeah.
I can see now you're thinking, and such and such, and you've got to keep it to one.
I'm going to just add one more thing.
Oh, you can't do that.
I mean,
favourite crops.
The volume of a squash is an amazing thing, and the weight of it. Like when you grow something from a little packet of seeds, and it ends up weighing as much as a bowling ball, or a couple of bowling balls, and it's going to yield such sort of intense flavour.
Yeah.
Something like a Crown Prince squash. If I'm allowed to have two, Cavolo Nero, Crown Prince squash.
Okay. Right. Briefly touched on the fact that retirement, I'm not going to say looming actually, because looming makes it sound ominous, and it's not. It's something I know you're very much looking forward to, because you've got your head full of ideas of things that you want to do. But how do you see your future with regard to, I mean, I'm looking outside now past you, outside the back doors at our garden, but that's always been my domain, really, hasn't it? How do you see your future at the allotment or in your gardening?
I would love to be to have the time to build a better and kind of bigger shed, and it would be really amazing to have. I mean, men, of course, not just men and women love sheds. It would be lovely to have something
That
kind
one
of
at the top end.
purpose built,
Yeah.
built and planned by myself with help maybe from my old friend James Penny.
Yeah.
That I could both use for gardening purposes, storage of wood or whatever else, but also maybe sort of just have the time to do a little bit of drawing in there from time to time.
Bit of a studio.
Yeah.
We mentioned this, didn't we, when we first got the allotment that we're at now?
Yeah.
And it has got that big dilapidated shed at the top, which it's been worth its weight in gold because it's brilliant storage. But we've said ever since we moved in, one day that would just be the perfect place to have a studio.
Yeah.
But also, it's interesting there that you're bringing together, going back to your painting and your drawing and actually tying it in with your gardening. It's almost the best of both worlds converging, isn't it?
It'd be interesting to do things to try and produce some artwork that was based on that space. And I've never really thought about doing that before.
No.
I've never been somebody who wanted to paint things necessarily from life.
No.
Or draw from life. Certainly not as a student, I didn't.
No.
That's
something to look forward to. But you think you'll carry on, if someone said to you, right, okay, that's it, the allotment's gone,
We'd find another one. We'd find another one.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd give up. I wouldn't give up. I'd want to find another one. I think our garden is probably it's too small really to do anything meaningful in. It's a very small garden. We live in a lovely place.
Yeah.
But the garden isn't so big.
Yeah.
We'd find another one. I think we
so.
put so much work into this one that if it was sold or if the allotment's closed down or something like that, you would be absolutely gutted because of the polytunnel and the greenhouses and the grapevine and the sheds and all that and the chicken run. There's a lot of work in there.
Yeah.
So
we're finding it. So you continue. You wouldn't take that as your opportunity to opt out.
I'm not opting out.
No. Okay. Well,
I'm definitely not opting out.
Well, Mike, I think for someone who doesn't usually talk very much on a video, you've talked quite a lot, and I'm actually having to cut you off now.
All of this will be edited.
Yeah, I'll edit Mike's bit out.
We'll get the balance right as usual.
Yeah. So anyway, that's been really interesting though, Mike. I mean, the sun's coming out now. We might yet get up to that allotment this afternoon.
Have you learned anything unusual about me there in this chat?
Oh, we're backfiring here.
Is that what it's called?
No. No, I've learned nothing interesting whatsoever.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think I have. Why do you think you surprised me somewhere? No, I'm not surprised. I failed to be surprised.
I think most of that is known.
Mike does surprise me sometimes, but that's a different sort of video. Okay, I'm going now. We've got my daughter's dog, Dira, is sitting at my feet right next to the mic, and she's growling. So that's not my tummy. That's Dira having a growl because there's probably a pigeon flown by in the back garden. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I think a little bit of a catch up on Mike there, a little bit of background.
When you see me lumbering about in the background with my wheelbarrow, looking lost.
We'll say, oh bless him. All he ever had was rhubarb and a bit of sugar. That's what he's like.
Look at him now. Look at him now.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Thanks. We'll see you again soon. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.